I set the lasagna down on the counter. Still in the glass dish I'd carried 4 blocks through the February cold, wrapped in a dish towel because I'd forgotten the carrier at home, and I looked at my daughter. She was arranging the charcuterie board she'd ordered from that specialty place on Bank Street. Expensive meats fanned out in careful rows. Tiny glass jars of mustard and honey placed just so. She didn't look up. "Mom, I think it'll be easier if you eat in here tonight. Neil's work people are coming. It's more of a professional thing." I stood there for a moment. The lasagna was warm under my hands. I'd been making that lasagna since before my daughter was born. My mother taught me on a Sunday afternoon in the kitchen of the house in Sudbury where I grew up, and I had made it for every person I ever loved, for every occasion that mattered. "A professional thing," I said. "You know how it is. It would just be simpler." I did know how it was. I had known for quite some time. "My name is June." No, wait. Let me start further back, because this story doesn't begin with a lasagna. It begins the way most stories like this begin, slowly and with the very best intentions on everyone's part, including mine. My name is Audrey. I am 63 years old. I was a nurse for 31 years, most of them at the Ottawa General, and I retired 4 years ago when my niece started making their opinions known on a daily basis. My husband passed away 6 years ago. Cardiac event, very sudden, in the driveway on a Tuesday morning in October. Malcolm. We had been married 34 years. After he died, I sold the house in Kanata because it was too big and too quiet, and every room had a memory standing in it, and I bought a small condo downtown, 2 bedrooms, a balcony where I could grow tomatoes in the summer. It was enough. It was actually more than enough. I was building something small and good for myself, and I was starting to feel okay again. And then my daughter called. Her name is Rebecca. She's 37, an events coordinator, married to Neil, who works in government consulting, which as far as I could tell meant he wore very good suits and talked in meetings. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, Theo, who is 7, and Maisie, who is 4. They had been renting an apartment in Sentry Town, and they wanted to buy a house, but the market had done what the market had done, and the down payment they needed was significant. "We're not asking you to give it to us," Rebecca said on the phone. "We pay you back. It's just a bridge, just to get us over the threshold." $65,000, that was the bridge. I want to be honest about that number because I think it matters. $65,000 from my retirement savings, which were not unlimited. I sat with it for a few days. I thought about Malcolm, who would have said do whatever helps them. Odd, money is just money. And I thought about Theo and Maisie, who I wanted to have a backyard. And I thought about Rebecca, who I had loved since before she took her first breath. I transferred the money. They bought a house in Barrhaven, a nice semi-detached on a quiet crescent with a backyard that backed onto a little greenbelt. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a kitchen with an island. It was a good house. When they got the keys, Rebecca cried, and I held her, and I felt like I had done something true and right. What I didn't fully understand in that moment was what I had set into motion. It started the way it always starts, with a favor that made sense. Rebecca called a month after they moved in. She was overwhelmed. The kids, the new house, her job. Could I come by on Tuesdays to watch Maisie while she did her calls from home? Of course I could. I loved Maisie. I drove out on Tuesdays. Then Thursdays were added, because Neil had early meetings and dropping Theo at school before 7 was a lot. And then could I pick Theo up on Wednesdays, because Rebecca's schedule had shifted? And then, this was around the 6-month mark, could I come on the weekends sometimes? Not every weekend, just when they had things going on, which turned out to be most weekends. I want to be fair here. I am not a woman who minds helping. I want to be very clear about that. I drove out to Barrhaven. I made lunches. I helped with homework. I read to Maisie every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, and she would press her small, warm head against my shoulder, and I would think, this is what it's all about. This right here. But somewhere in the middle of all of it, something shifted, and I don't think anyone planned for it to shift. I just think no one was paying attention. Neil started referring to me as the kids' schedule rather than their grandmother. Not to my face exactly, but I would overhear it. The kids have coverage on Thursday. Or he would text Rebecca something like, "Is your mom doing the Maisie pickup or do we need a backup?" I became a variable in their logistics, a resource to be confirmed or substituted. Rebecca. And this is the part that still makes me tired to think about. Rebecca started passing his language to me. "Can you confirm you're available Thursday? We need to know our coverage for the long weekend." Words like that. Words that had nothing to do with mother and daughter. One afternoon in November, I came to pick up Theo from school, and Rebecca met me at the door looking distracted and said, very quickly, "Oh, while you're here, could you throw in a load of laundry? Just the darks. The basket's in the hall." And then she was back on her phone before I'd taken off my boots. I did throw in the laundry, and I folded it when it was done, and I started dinner because it was nearly 5 and no one had anything on the stove, and then I drove the 40 minutes home in the dark. The dinner thing was new. It started just naturally. I was there. It was dinner time. I knew how to cook. But within a few weeks, it had become an assumption. "Oh, if you could maybe start something around 4:30, became the regular ask. I was arriving at 1 in the afternoon and leaving after cleanup 3 or 4 days a week, making a 70-kilometer round trip each time, on top of the gas, on top of my own life going quiet and thin in my condo while I serviced theirs. I told myself this is what love looks like. I told myself Malcolm would have done the same. The March break was when I started to understand what was actually happening. Rebecca and Neil went to Tulum. A week, just the two of them. A trip Neil's company had covered. The kids stayed with me. That part was fine. More than fine. Theo and Maisie and I had a wonderful week. We made soup and played board games, and I taught Maisie to snap her fingers, which she considered the greatest achievement of her life to that point. What was not fine was the Monday they got back. Rebecca texted from the airport, "Landing soon. Can you have the kids bathed and ready for bed? We'll be tired." Not thank you for a week of your life. Not we owe you so much. Just have them ready. I bathed the kids. I read Maisie her book. I told Theo I loved him. And when Rebecca and Neil walked in the door with their tanned faces and their rolling bags, Rebecca hugged the kids and said, "You're the best, Mom," the way you'd say it to a reliable piece of furniture. I drove home that night and sat in my condo for a long time, in the dark, not turning on any lights. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it would even out. I told myself, they're busy, they're young, they don't mean anything by it. But something had been set, and I knew it, and I kept knowing it. The dinner party was in April. Neil had colleagues coming, 4 couples, people from his firm, the kind of evening where the wine mattered and the appetizers were chosen to communicate something. Rebecca had asked me 2 weeks in advance if I could come the afternoon of to help with setup and cooking, and stay through the evening to manage the kids. They'd want to be with the adults for the early part, but then Maisie would need putting down at 7:30, and Theo sometimes needed help settling, and it would just be easier if I was there. I said yes. I drove out at 2 in the afternoon. I made the lasagna. I prepared 2 other dishes. I set up the children's dinner separately, cut everything into appropriate pieces, sat with them while they ate, cleaned up after them, and then got Maisie into her pajamas and read her 4 books because she was wound up from the activity in the house. At 7, I came downstairs. The adults were starting to arrive. I could hear voices in the foyer, the sounds of winter coats being taken, laughter, the kind of warm noise the house makes when a party is beginning. I had not met most of these people. I went into the kitchen to check on the food, and that was where Rebecca found me. She was in a dress I hadn't seen before, navy blue, very pretty. She looked lovely. She looked like a woman hosting an important evening in her home. "Mom," she said. She glanced toward the living room. The voices were closer now. "I think it would be easier if you just stayed in here for tonight. You know, you could eat in the kitchen. It's just Neil's colleagues. It's a work thing, and the group is already kind of set. It would be weird to add someone." The kitchen I had cooked in for the past 3 hours. "Weird to add someone." I said. You know what I mean. I did know what she meant. I meant that I was fine to make the food, but not to sit at the table where it was being served. It meant that I was useful enough to manage her children and her household, but not appropriate to present to her husband's colleagues as, what? Her mother? A person? I looked at the lasagna on the counter. My mother's lasagna. 4 blocks in the February cold, though that was last month. Today was April, and I had driven 45 minutes, and I had been here since 2 o'clock, and Maisie had gone to sleep with her head on my shoulder. Okay, I said, and I waited until Rebecca went back to her guests. And then I put on my coat, and I picked up my purse, and I walked out the front door. I did not slam it. I want to be clear about that. I closed it the way you close a door when you finally finished with a room. I sat in my car at the end of the crescent for a few minutes. I wasn't sure what I felt exactly. I had expected to feel more. What I actually felt was clear, the way the air feels after a long rain. Clear and cold and very, very still. I drove home. I did not answer Rebecca's text at 9:30 that night, which said, "Mom, everything okay?" I did not answer the call at 10 or the one the next morning. I sat with the quiet of my condo and I thought. I had spent 31 years as a nurse. I had held the hands of strangers in the worst moments of their lives. I had raised a daughter, mostly alone after Malcolm's first health scare when Rebecca was 12, when he was limited in what he could do for 3 years. I had buried my husband. I had learned to live alone in a way that was actually living. I had given $65,000 toward a house and 3 days a week of my time and energy and body, and every Tuesday I had sat with a 4-year-old girl and taught her things that would stay with her long after I was gone. And I had been asked to eat in the kitchen. I called my sister Harriet in Thunder Bay on Saturday morning. Harriet is 68. She has 4 children of her own. She is the most practical person I have ever known in my life, and she has a talent for saying exactly the right thing, in exactly the right thing, in exactly the amount of words it needs. "Audrey," she said when I had finished, "you know what this is." "I know what it is." "What are you going to do?" "I'm thinking," I said. "Don't think too long," she said. "You've been thinking for 8 months." She wasn't wrong. I called Rebecca on Sunday afternoon. I asked her to come to me, not the other way around, which was the first time I had made that request. She arrived looking worried, which told me she had some understanding of what was happening, even if she hadn't let herself name it. We sat at my kitchen table. I made tea. I told her, calmly, in the words I had been organizing for 2 days, what I had observed, not accusations. Observations, that I had become a service provider rather than a family member, that the language around my presence had shifted in ways she might not have noticed but that I had, that being asked to eat separately from the household I had spent the day working for was not a small thing, regardless of how it was intended, that I had been losing myself in small increments for 8 months, and the dinner party was not where it started, but it was where I saw it clearly. Rebecca cried. Of course she did. She said she hadn't thought of it that way. She said Neil set the tone sometimes and she just went along without questioning it. She said she was sorry, Mom. She was really sorry. I believed her. I believed she meant it in that moment. But I also knew something I hadn't known before I was a nurse, and that I knew very well after. The difference between a person being sorry and a person being ready to change. Sorry is an emotion. Change is a decision. And the decision part takes longer, and it doesn't come from a tearful Sunday afternoon conversation. It comes from months of choosing differently, over and over, in small moments. And I had no way of knowing whether Rebecca and Neil would make those choices. People usually need a reason. I gave them a reason. The following week, I called a financial advisor. She had helped me before, a woman named Sandra, very thorough, no nonsense. I explained what I had contributed to my daughter's home purchase. I explained that no formal agreement had ever been documented. Sandra was quiet for a moment, and then she said very gently, "Audrey, do you have any emails, any texts?" I had texts, hundreds of them. Rebecca had been confirming the arrangement in writing for months without realizing she was documenting it. Can you transfer the rest by Friday? The mortgage goes through on Monday. Messages like that. I did not want to go to court. I want to be honest about that. I did not want to make a formal claim against my daughter's home. What I wanted was to be taken seriously. What I did was speak to a lawyer, just a conversation, just to understand my options. And when the lawyer explained what could theoretically be argued regarding an implied loan rather than a gift, I understood that I was not without recourse. I wrote Rebecca a letter, not an email, an actual letter on paper, which I dropped in the mail on a Thursday in May. In it, I told her that I loved her and that I loved her and that I loved Theo and Maisie and that nothing about this would change those facts. I also told her that I was stepping back from the schedule entirely while we all figured out what our relationship was going to look like. I told her that I had spoken to a lawyer about the $65,000, not to threaten, but to be transparent. And I told her that when she was ready to have a conversation about what family actually meant to both of us, I would be ready to have it. I did not hear back for 11 days. When Rebecca called, her voice was different. Quieter, more careful. She said she and Neil had talked. She said they had talked for a long time. She asked if she could bring the kids to see me that Saturday, just the kids, no agenda, and I said yes. Theo ran in the door. Maisie found my lap and stayed there for an hour. We made soup. We played cards. The kids didn't know anything had shifted, which was exactly right. Rebecca sat at my kitchen table where no one was asked to eat separately from anyone, and she said, "I'm going to do better, Mom. I need you to know that I know what happened." I heard her. I will keep hearing her. But I've also learned at 63 the particular wisdom of watching rather than trusting too quickly. I will watch. I will be present with my grandchildren because they did not make the choices their parents made and they deserve their grandmother. I will accept an apology as an opening, not a resolution. I took my name off the list of standing Tuesday pickups. I told Rebecca I was available to help when I was genuinely available and when it was genuinely mutual, not as a function of their household logistics, but as a grandmother who chose to be there. The distinction mattered to me enormously. I do not know whether it matters enough to Neil, but I know that Rebecca heard it. I also quietly updated my will. I'd already done so, actually, the week after the dinner party, before anything else. A woman I trusted had been my witness. Some decisions make themselves once you see clearly enough. The lasagna went into my own freezer that night. I ate it over the following week, a portion at a time, at my own table, in my own kitchen, on my own terms. It was as good as it had ever been. My mother would have been pleased. I am not a woman who stopped loving her daughter. I want to end with that because I think it's important. This is not a story about a family that broke apart. It is a story about a woman who nearly disappeared into someone else's life and who caught herself before she was gone entirely. I am still here. I am at my kitchen table in my condo, downtown with my tea and my tomatoes coming up on the balcony, and Harriet calling on Sunday mornings. I am still here, and I know what I am worth, and it is not a function I perform on someone else's schedule. It took me too long to understand that, but I understood it before it was too late, and that has made all the difference. I keep coming back to the lasagna, not because it was dramatic, it wasn't really, but because of what it represented. I had carried that dish 4 blocks in the February cold, and then in April I had driven 45 minutes, and I had been in that kitchen since 2 in the afternoon, and my granddaughter had fallen asleep on my shoulder. And still, I was being asked to make myself small enough to disappear. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it these past months, is that what happened between Rebecca and me wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow erosion. Every time I said yes when I should have asked a question. Every time I folded the laundry without mentioning that no one had asked me to. Every time I told myself that love means absorbing things without complaint. I was teaching the people around me, very quietly and very consistently, that I had no edges, that I would simply continue to give until someone thought to stop taking. That's not love. Or rather, it's love without self-respect, and love without self-respect eventually becomes invisible. I became invisible. Not because Rebecca is a cruel person. She isn't. But kindness requires attention, and attention requires that the people you love are visible to you. And I had made myself so accommodating, so frictionless, that I had essentially vanished from her line of sight. The night I walked out of that dinner party, something in me that had been confused for a long time became very clear. I understood that I had a choice about who I was going to be in the years I had left. I could keep showing up on someone else's schedule, being confirmed or substituted like a calendar variable, growing smaller and quieter until there was nothing much left of me. Or I could decide, clearly, without drama, without bitterness, that I was worth more than that, not because anyone had told me so, because I knew it. Knowing your own worth is something you arrive at, not something you're handed. What took courage wasn't walking out the door. It was the letter I wrote on the Thursday in May. Sitting down and putting into words, honestly and without cruelty, what I had seen and felt and needed, that was harder than any shift I ever worked at the hospital. It would have been easier to go quiet, to simply withdraw and let the distance explain itself. But quiet withdrawal is its own kind of avoidance, and I had spent enough of my life avoiding the harder, truer conversation. Harriet told me I'd been thinking for 8 months. She was right, but thinking isn't wasted time if it leads you somewhere honest. I needed to understand what I actually wanted before I could ask for it. I needed to be clear in my own mind before I could be clear with my daughter. That's not weakness. That's how real decisions get made. I am 63 years old. I have my tomatoes on the balcony and my tea on Sunday mornings and my grandchildren on days I choose to be there. I have a will that reflects what I actually value. I have a relationship with my daughter that is still tender and still forming, but that has, for the first time in a long time, some truth in it. That's what I walked out the door and found.